Hi, I'm Wade Lawrence, Museum Director and Senior Curator at the Museum at Bethel Woods. The band was very anticipated. A lot of the band fans really enjoyed it, and a lot of people who weren't familiar with the band didn't get it. They weren't a traditional rock and roll band. They were American roots. They played music that they felt in their hearts, and to hell with commercialism. They wanted to play music for the joy of playing music. In fact, even their stage setup, there would be a carpet on the stage, and they would set up facing one another instead of facing the audience. So they were playing for one another and playing off of one another. And that's the kind of intimate performance that probably doesn't translate well to 500,000 people. But that was pure band. I think one of the more popular bands that played that didn't get a lot of attention was Creedence Clearwater Revival. Their set was just one hit after another. John Fogerty wasn't really happy with the performance. His drummer was a little too high, not playing his best. Creedence went on right after the Grateful Dead. John Fogerty is well known for saying that when they came on stage, everybody in the audience was asleep. The Dead didn't do their best performance that night. Quill were wildly popular in Boston, where they were from, but it was for the most part small venues. Michael Lang hired them to come several weeks before the festival to entertain the locals, to go out into the public, and they did performances in insane asylums, jails, community centers. Basically, they were for PR for the festival. And then they also performed here on site for the workers that were building the stage and things like that. But when they appeared on stage on Saturday, they actually played a good set. But it was music that nobody in the audience heard unless they were from Boston. And they were kind of audience participation songs, which is kind of hard to do when you're unknown, playing unfamiliar music, and it's that large a crowd. And they went their separate ways soon after the Woodstock Festival. And only this year, in 2018, did they ever get back together again. They came back to the Woodstock Festival site for a documentary that was being made about the lost Woodstock performance. The Who was at the top of their game when they hit Woodstock. Tommy had been released earlier in the year. A month before, they had started performing it publicly. And so when they hit the stage at Woodstock, they played a couple of their old songs and then launched right into Tommy. And they did the entire rock opera for an audience that was probably very familiar with the material. Just as Roger Daltrey is singing "See Me, Feel Me" at the end of the rock opera, the sun is coming up. One can only imagine the magical feeling in the audience of hearing "See Me, Feel Me" and the sun coming up. It had to be magical. Pete Townshend wasn't a big fan of coming to the Woodstock Festival. He didn't like festivals, for one thing. And the whole vibe of Woodstock was about freedom and love and all that, but it was also a lot of young people with long hair in the mud, smoking dope and taking acid. At one point during the Who's set, between songs, Abbie Hoffman leapt on stage, and he grabbed the microphone, Pete's microphone, and started talking about John Sinclair. He thought that it was a bunch of bullshit that John Sinclair is sitting in prison while we're here doing this festival. Pete Townshend didn't want to have anything to do with that. There isn't any video footage that I'm aware of, but the audio is pretty clear that Pete went over to Abbie and bopped him on the head with the neck of his guitar, with the head of his guitar, and "Get off my effing stage." And when the audience kind of gave him a round of applause of approval and Abbie left the stage, Pete was heard to say, "Yeah, I can dig it." And then he launched into the next song. Roger Daltrey just appeared at Bethel Woods Center for the Arts. I was lucky enough to get to talk to him before the concert. And one of the things that I asked him about a story, how the Who was staying at the Holiday Inn in Liberty, and they were out on the street throwing frisbees to one another. The helicopter came down and landed right in the middle of the road, picked up the Who, helicoptered into the festival. And according to the eyewitness, the helicopter landed on the stage, which we all know didn't happen. I mentioned that to Roger, and Roger laughed, and he said, there were no helicopters. The Who never had a helicopter at Woodstock. I drove up to Woodstock in my aunt's borrowed Volkswagen, and we got to the festival itself in a rented station wagon. You gotta ask yourself, how in the world did Sha Na Na end up at Woodstock, especially sandwiched right in front of Jimi Hendrix, the opening act for Jimi Hendrix, if you will. Sha Na Na, for those of you who don't know who Sha Na Na was, they had a very popular syndicated TV show in the 70s and 80s, but they were caricatures. They were doing 50s music, and it was a shtick for them. And they knew it. These guys were intelligent guys. They were all Columbia students, and how in the world did they get booked at Woodstock? I don't have a clue, except maybe Michael Lang was down in the village some night and somebody said, you gotta see this group. And he saw them and said, sure, you wanna come to Woodstock. But to put them in the bill, the second to last act of the entire festival, right before Jimi Hendrix, I would think that the brown acid would have been doing its work about then. One band that probably owes its career to Woodstock is Santana. Santana was a young band of really talented musicians in the San Francisco Bay Area that were very well known on the West Coast, but had not released their first album yet. It was in the can, ready to be released, when they appeared on the stage at Woodstock and Santana exploded on the stage. Drummer Michael Shreve banged on those drums and created an impression that's widely recognized as probably one of the best drum solos in rock history. Santana's shining moment at Woodstock was Soul Sacrifice. It was towards the end of their set. Carlos Santana was very high on mescaline or LSD at the time, and he was having a hard time keeping it together. He's been on record as saying that the guitar neck was turning into a serpent, and he was struggling to keep it in his hand and play all the right notes. Everybody was playing at their best. Soul Sacrifice became an anthem for Woodstock. And it's probably Santana's breakthrough moment where the entire world realized this is a band that they have to see. Santana's music opened the doors for an entire generation of Latin musicians that brought Latin flavor, Latin soul, Latin rhythm to rock and roll music. It became an important part of the music we listened to in the 1960s and 70s.